The morning sun shone brightly over Pine Grove Elementary School. The playground buzzed with the happy sounds of children playing during recess. 30 kids ran around the swings and slides, their laughter filling the air. Everything seemed normal, just like any other Tuesday in spring. Mrs. Brown watched the children from her usual spot near the basketball court. She had been teaching at Pine Grove for 15 years, but something felt different today. The air seemed heavier, almost electric. She checked her watch. 10 more minutes until the bell would ring. That's when she first noticed the strange shimmer in the air. It looked like the heat waves you see above hot roads in summer, but this was different. The shimmer moved, almost like it had a purpose. Mrs. Brown blinked hard and adjusted her glasses. She had never seen anything quite like it. Tommy, one of her brightest students, was the first to point at the sky. "Look!" he shouted, his finger aimed at the strange distortion that was growing larger. Other children stopped their games and looked up too. The shimmer had turned into a soft purple glow that covered part of the playground. Mrs. Brown's heart started racing. Something was very wrong. Everyone inside. She yelled, but her voice seemed to bounce off an invisible wall. She ran forward, but it felt like moving through thick syrup. The purple light grew stronger. 12 children stood frozen in the strange light. Tommy, who had first spotted it, tried to move but couldn't. Next to him, his best friend Lucy reached for his hand, her eyes wide with fear. The other 10 kids caught in the light looked just as scared, unable to run or even cry out. The rest of the children and teachers watched in horror as the purple glow became blindingly bright. There was a sound like a giant rubber band snapping. And then, nothing. The light vanished. So did the 12 children caught in it. The playground erupted in chaos. Kids started screaming and crying. Mrs. Brown ran to the empty spot where her students had been standing just seconds ago. All that remained was a faint smell like burned metal and small patches of grass that looked frozen solid. Within minutes, police cars surrounded the school. Parents rushed from their homes and workplaces, many still in their office clothes or work uniforms. They pushed through the growing crowd, desperately calling out names of their children. The look of relief on some faces when they found their kids made the despair of others even more heartbreaking. Military vehicles arrived next. Men and women in uniform set up strange-looking equipment around the playground. They waved devices that made quiet beeping sounds over the frozen patches of grass. Their faces grew more serious with each reading they took. Principal Roberts tried to keep everyone calm, but his voice shook as he spoke to the parents. "We don't know exactly what happened," he said, "but every possible resource is being used to find the children." He knew his words sounded empty. How do you explain something that shouldn't be possible? The local news vans showed up last, their cameras capturing the scene that would soon be broadcast around the world. Reporters spoke in hushed voices about unexplained phenomena and possible mass kidnapping, but everyone who had seen it knew this was something else entirely. As the sun began to set, the military confirmed what many had already guessed, but were afraid to say out loud. The energy readings matched nothing known to Earth science. The strange purple light, the impossible disappearance, it all pointed to something beyond human technology. That night, 12 families sat in empty bedrooms, holding stuffed animals and school backpacks that would not be needed tomorrow. Photos of smiling children seemed to watch from walls and shelves, their faces frozen in happiness from a simpler time. Just that morning. The world had changed in less than a minute. Humanity had made first contact with alien life, not through grand speeches or peaceful meetings, but through the taking of their children. They didn't know it yet, but this mistake would cost the aliens dearly. Nobody takes human children and gets away with it. Nobody in this galaxy or any other. High above Earth's atmosphere, the massive collection ship hummed with activity. Director First stood tall, his scaled skin gleaming under the bright lights of the command center. He watched the 12 human children through multiple screens, each showing a different observation chamber. His thin lips curved into what his species considered a smile. perfect specimens, he said to his science team. Young enough to study, old enough to show their species traits. He tapped one of the screens with a long finger. Look how they react. Such primitive emotional responses. The children had been separated into pairs, each pair in a different chamber designed to look like a simple Earth classroom. The aliens thought this would keep them calm. They were wrong. The children weren't fooled by the fake rooms that looked almost, but not quite, right. In one chamber, Tommy and Lucy sat at desks that were slightly too tall. The metal was cold, not warm like wood. The walls glowed faintly, and the air smelled like cleaning supplies. Tommy had already noticed that the clock on the wall wasn't really moving. It was just a picture. Fascinating, said lead researcher second, watching Tommy examine the room. They show surprising awareness of their environment. He made notes on his floating screen, not realizing that Tommy was actually looking for ways out. The ship's crew had collected specimens from 50 different worlds, but they had never taken children before. The collectors believed humans were too primitive to be dangerous. After all, they had only reached their own moon. They still burned fossil fuels. They fought wars over imaginary lines on their planet's surface. Should we begin the tests? Asked third assistant. She held up a device that would measure the children's brain activity. The collectors were especially interested in human emotions, which they saw as a weakness. They didn't understand how feelings like love, fear, and anger could help a species survive. Director first nodded. Start with simple puzzles. Let's see how their primitive minds work. He turned to leave, then stopped. And make sure the containment fields are at full strength. We wouldn't want our specimens wandering around. But the collectors had made their first big mistake. They had designed their security systems to stop adults, not children. The gaps in the energy fields were just a bit too wide. The sensors were set just a bit too high. Small hands could reach places they hadn't thought to guard. In her chamber, Lucy had already found a loose panel under the fake desk. Tommy had discovered that if he hummed at just the right pitch, the glowing walls flickered. In other chambers, the rest of the children were making similar discoveries. They didn't know it yet, but their childlike curiosity would be their greatest weapon. The collectors' second mistake was not studying Earth's entertainment. They didn't know about movies where clever kids outsmarted grown-ups. They hadn't read books about children solving mysteries and saving the day. They didn't understand that Earth's children grew up learning that being small didn't mean being helpless. As Director First reviewed the day's collection report, he felt very pleased with himself. His ship had achieved something remarkable, the first collection of human young. The Council would surely promote him for this achievement. Everything was going perfectly according to plan. But as the ship's artificial day cycle dimmed to night mode, small fingers were already prying at loose panels. Young minds were already mapping out paths through the ship's ventilation system. 12 pairs of eyes were watching, learning, and planning. The collectors thought they were studying humanity's children. They didn't realize that humanity's children were studying them right back. And in the game of observation, the children were winning. Every TV channel, radio station, and computer screen on Earth suddenly went dark. Then a face appeared, not human, but trying to look friendly. Director First had practiced his smile for hours, but it still looked wrong, like a snake trying to look cute. People of Earth, he said, his voice translated by computers. Do not be afraid. We are the collectors, a scientific race dedicated to understanding all species. Your children are safe and well cared for in our research facility. The broadcast showed clips of the children in their chambers. The aliens thought they were showing how well they treated their specimens. Instead, they made the biggest mistake yet. In the military's analysis room, Captain Jane Miller leaned closer to her screen. Stop the video, she ordered. Zoom in on that reflection. In the shiny surface of a fake desk, she could see parts of the ship that the aliens hadn't meant to show. Her team worked through the night, mapping every detail they could spot in windows, metal surfaces, and even the children's eyes. Meanwhile, on the ship, The children had made their own discovery. Lucy, who played flute in the school band, had noticed something odd. When she hummed certain notes, the lights flickered. When Tommy tapped his desk in rhythm, the door sensors blinked. "It's like music class," Lucy whispered to Tommy through a hidden gap they'd found between their chambers. "Remember how we learned about sound waves? How they can break glass if they're just right?" The children began testing different sounds. They hummed songs from music class, tapped rhythms they knew from band practice, and whispered through gaps in the walls. The aliens saw this as stress behavior, noting in their logs how humans used primitive sound patterns for comfort. Back on Earth, the broadcast continued. Director first explained how humans would benefit from this research. He talked about advancing science and sharing knowledge. But his words were drowned out by the sound of parents crying, soldiers preparing, and engineers working day and night to understand the alien technology. "Look at this," Tommy said to Lucy, pointing at a wall panel that vibrated when they sang their school song. "If we all sing together, maybe we can." He didn't finish his sentence, but Lucy understood. That night, all 12 children began practicing, pretending they were just singing to feel better. The collector's ship had been designed to be perfectly efficient. Every system worked together in harmony, connected by waves of energy that the aliens thought were too complex for humans to understand. But they hadn't counted on children who grew up with music classes, science shows, and stories about kid heroes. Military analysts on Earth worked frantically to decode the ship's layout from the broadcast. They didn't know that the most important information wasn't in the reflections or background. It was in the sound of children's voices singing songs that made alien technology shiver. Captain Miller finally stood back from her screens, a map slowly taking shape. "We can see 40% of their ship's layout now," she reported. "But something's odd. Their systems are showing strange fluctuations, like..." She paused, listening to the children singing in the background of the broadcast. Her eyes widened as she realized what was happening. The children weren't just singing to feel brave. They were testing the alien ship's weaknesses, one note at a time. Earth's military might was gathering, but the first strike against the collectors had already begun, with a choir of 12 young voices raised in harmony. Admiral Thompson stood at the command center of Earth's first space warship, the Defender. 5 years ago, a small alien scout ship had crashed in the desert. 3 years ago, another one went down in the ocean. Now those accidents were paying off. Earth wasn't as helpless as the collectors thought. "All systems ready," reported his crew. The ship hummed with power from engines that weren't supposed to exist yet. Stolen alien technology mixed with human innovation filled every corner. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Below them, more ships waited. Chinese battleships carried Russian weapons. American scientists worked with Iranian engineers. The world had united in a way that would have seemed impossible just days ago. When the collectors took those children, they didn't just attack a school. They attacked all of humanity. "Fleet status report," Admiral Thompson called out. His daughter Amy was one of the taken children. He kept her picture on his control panel, next to the ship's main controls. 10 ships ready, sir. Power systems at 90%. The crew worked with quiet determination. They had trained for weeks, learning to use technology they barely understood. But they had something the aliens didn't expect: desperate determination. In orbit, the collector's massive ship continued its research, unaware of what was coming. Director first watched the Earth below, amused by the tiny satellites trying to observe his vessel. "Such primitive devices," he laughed. "They can barely reach their own moon." But he was wrong. Humans had learned more from those crashed scout ships than anyone suspected. The Defender's engines weren't just copies of alien technology. They were better. Humans had found ways to improve them, make them stronger, more efficient. "All ships, power up," Admiral Thompson ordered. The fleet rose from hidden bases around the world. They looked rough and unfinished compared to the sleek collector ship. Wires showed through panels. Some parts were held together with what looked like duct tape, but appearances didn't matter. On the collector ship, an alarm suddenly blinked. "Director, called out a worried crew member. "We're detecting energy signatures. Multiple vessels approaching." The alien turned to his screens, his confident smile fading. "Impossible," he whispered. The readings showed weapons that humans shouldn't have. Power systems that weren't supposed to exist on Earth for hundreds of years. How did they? Admiral Thompson's voice boomed across space, broadcasting on frequencies the aliens thought humans didn't know about. "This is Earth's defense fleet. Return our children or face the consequences." The collector crews scrambled to battle stations, but they were already behind. Their shields had been weakened by days of children's songs, hitting just the right frequencies. Their sensors were confused by human ships that shouldn't exist. "They're just humans." Director first tried to reassure his crew. Primitive, emotional humans. But as he watched Earth's fleet approach, he realized his mistake. Those emotions he dismissed, love, anger, fear for their children, had driven humans to do the impossible. The battle for Earth's children was about to begin. And humanity wasn't fighting with just weapons and technology. They were fighting with the fierce determination of parents protecting their young. Tommy had figured out the pattern. Each time they sang the school song at a certain pitch, the ship's lights flickered in the same way. Through the hidden gaps between chambers, he shared his discovery with the other children. "Remember music class?" he whispered. "How Mr. Wilson taught us about sound waves." Lucy organized the plan. She had perfect pitch and could tell exactly which notes made the alien technology react most strongly. "It's like that time we broke a glass in science class," she told the others. But bigger. The children started their attack during the ship's night cycle. In the first chamber, Tommy and Lucy began with a quiet tune. In the second chamber, 2 more kids joined in. Then another pair and another, until all 12 voices rose in harmony. The aliens' night crew noticed something odd on their screens. Power levels wavered. Security fields flickered, but they dismissed it as normal fluctuations. After all, what harm could come from children singing? The high note next, Lucy signaled through the wall. She had taught everyone the perfect pitch that made the door controls buzz. 12 young voices hit the note together, holding it steady. In the control room, warning lights began to flash. An alien technician frowned at his readings. "The power grid is showing strange patterns," he reported, but his superior waved him off. They were too busy preparing for the primitive human fleet they'd detected. Nobody paid attention to the singing. The children had practiced for days, pretending they were just scared and seeking comfort. The aliens never realized each song was a test, each tune an experiment. Now, as Earth's fleet approached, the real concert began. Through the ventilation system they'd mapped in secret, the sound traveled everywhere. The ship's energy field ran on waves of power, just like sound waves. And now those waves were being disrupted by a chorus of children who'd spent years in music classes. Deep in the ship's core, critical systems began to fail. Shield generators whined as they tried to maintain power. Navigation computers displayed incorrect data. The collector's perfect harmony was being shattered by human songs. Emergency alarms blared, but they couldn't drown out the children's voices. The aliens rushed to fix their failing systems, not understanding that the very thing they dismissed as primitive, human music, was tearing their technology apart. Lucy led the final verse. The one they'd discovered made the force fields ripple most strongly. The other children followed her lead perfectly. Their voices rose higher, stronger, more determined with each note. In the observation center, Director First watched in horror as his ship's systems crashed one by one. The specimens he'd thought were safely contained were destroying his ship's defenses from the inside. And they were doing it with nothing but their voices. The children sang louder as they felt the ship shudder. They sang for their parents coming to save them. They sang for Earth. But most of all, they sang because the aliens had made one final mistake. They had forgotten that human children were not just test subjects. They were heroes in their own story. The first shot came from the Defender, streaking across space in a brilliant blue arc. It hit the collector ship's shields, which flickered weakly. Inside their command center, the aliens stared in shock. Their shields should have been much stronger. Impossible, Director First muttered. Their weapons are too advanced. He didn't realize the real reason his shields were failing. 12 children singing in perfect harmony somewhere deep in his ship. Admiral Thompson watched from the defender's bridge as his fleet moved into position. The ships looked odd together. American, Chinese, Russian, and more, all flying as one. But they had trained for this, practicing with their stolen alien technology until they could use it better than its creators. All ships, attack pattern Beta, he ordered. The fleet split into 3 groups, just like they had practiced. The collectors tried to target them, but their weapons wouldn't lock on properly. The children's songs had scrambled their targeting systems. Inside the collector ship, alarms blared everywhere. Security teams ran through corridors, trying to fix failing systems. Nobody noticed the small figures moving through maintenance tunnels. The children had memorized the ship's layout during their days of pretending to be scared and lost. Status report. Director First shouted as another blast rocked his ship. His crew worked frantically at their stations, but nothing made sense. Shields were at half power. Weapons misfired. Even the artificial gravity flickered. The Earth fleet pressed their advantage. They had learned from those crashed scout ships that alien technology had a weakness. It relied too much on perfect harmony. Disrupt that harmony, and everything fell apart. The children's songs were doing exactly that. Tommy and Lucy led their group through the ship's tunnels, singing louder now that the battle had started. Other children did the same in different parts of the ship. Their voices echoed through the ventilation system, turning the entire vessel into one giant musical instrument of destruction. Multiple hull breaches. An alien officer reported, "We're losing power to all sections." The collector ship's perfect design was becoming its worst enemy. Each system failure triggered another, then another, like dominoes falling. Earth's ships dodged the collector's weak return fire easily. Their makeshift fleet might look ugly, but it worked perfectly. Humans had taken alien technology and made it their own, adding backup systems and manual controls that the collectors never thought to include. Engines failing. Came another panicked report. Director First watched helplessly as his ship started to drift. The humans had done the impossible. They had beaten technology hundreds of years ahead of their time. Admiral Thompson gave the final order. All ships, target their main power core. Let's end this. The fleet moved as one, weapons charging for a final strike. But they didn't know that the children had one last surprise ready, something that would make their job even easier. Deep in the ship, 12 young voices reached the highest note they could, holding it until the walls shook. The collector ship's remaining systems couldn't take it. Power cores shut down. Artificial gravity failed. Emergency lights flashed uselessly. The mighty collector ship, pride of an advanced alien race, had been defeated by human children armed with nothing but their voices, and human parents armed with desperate determination. The boarding pods attached to the collector ship's hull with loud metallic clangs. Admiral Thompson led the first team in, his weapon ready. But instead of alien resistance, they heard something else. Children singing, their voices echoing through the darkened corridors. "This way," a young voice called out. It was Tommy, his head poking out from a maintenance tunnel. "We mapped the whole ship. We can show you the fastest way to the others." Admiral Thompson's team followed the boy's lead, amazed at how well the children knew the ship's layout. Lucy met them at a junction, leading another group of soldiers down a different path. "The control room is that way," she pointed. "The aliens are all trapped inside because we broke their door controls with the high notes." Director First and his crew huddled in their command center, watching helplessly as humans swarmed their ship. Their weapons were useless, their security systems shut down by the very specimens they had thought were safely contained. "The others are through here," Tommy called out, leading more rescue teams to where the rest of the children waited. One by one, Each child was found, all of them safe, all of them proud of what they had accomplished. Admiral Thompson finally found his daughter Amy helping guide another rescue team. She ran to him, hugging him tight. "Did you hear us singing, Dad?" she asked. "We remembered everything from music class." The collectors surrendered without a fight. They had no choice. Their mighty ship had been defeated by human children using nothing but their voices, and human parents using nothing but their determination to save their kids. "You don't understand." Director first tried to explain as he was led away in handcuffs designed from his own technology. "We were studying them. They were just specimens." His voice trailed off as he watched the children confidently leading Earth's soldiers through his ship, explaining how they had mapped every corridor and learned every weakness. Within hours, Earth's scientists were all over the collector ship, learning its secrets, but they found that the children already understood more about how it worked than anyone expected. "The whole ship runs on waves," Tommy explained to the amazed engineers, "just like sound waves in music class. Once we figured that out, it was easy." News of the victory spread across Earth. People celebrated in every city, but nowhere was the joy greater than in the small town where it all began. Pine Grove Elementary School would never be just another school again. The 12 children returned as heroes, but they didn't brag. They just went back to their classes, though music class became everyone's favorite subject. Mrs. Brown noticed that during recess, they still sang together sometimes, and the lights in the school would flicker just a little. Earth had changed forever. The collector ship became humanity's first true starship. The aliens' technology was studied and improved upon. But the greatest lesson wasn't about technology at all. It was about never underestimating the power of human children, human parents, and the strength that comes from protecting the ones you love.